Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel.
I'm Kumo.
And I'm Natasha.
And we are
Izwelami.
Welcome back to our channel, as Natasha has said again.
Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel.
I'm Kumo.
And I'm Natasha.
And we are
Izwelami.
Today we're going to be talking about the new kid on the block. Not so new kid on the block, but here we are talking about it.
Yeah, so today we're talking about all things technology related. And as usual, we always want to talk about trends, etc. But you know, what's important is how do we bring it down to the African continent, and how do we bring it down to you and I as Africans living on this in this continent, and how do we, you know, take those conversations further. So today we're going to be talking about 4IR, also known as the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and the genesis of it, the impact, and where we see it playing a role in certain areas, right, in our spaces.
So maybe it's important for us to understand what industrialization means. And industrialization is the rise of manufacturing and using less labor-intensive work and more machinery. And then the industrialization has had like about 3 phases: the first, the second, and the third industrial revolution.
Yeah, and now we're living squarely in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So I think the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the genesis of it was first coined at the World Economic Forum by Klaus Schwab. There's a book and there's literature out there around the work that he's done. So basically, the first Industrial Revolution was all centered around steam technology, steam engines, etc., and how they came about. The second Industrial Revolution focused predominantly on the use of electricity, and we saw the rise of simplification of like manufacturing and things such as the assembly line, where we saw a lot of cars going out and being manufactured. Then we move into the third Industrial Revolution, which was our first introduction to digitization and the technology as we know it today. And so there we heard buzzwords such as the Internet of Things. The dot-com bubble also happened during that era, and now we're squarely in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is basically the maturity of the third.
Yeah, so using the internet and the technology that we have taken from the third industrial revolution and implementing it in our essential daily lives. So using it to implement it into our bodies, into our work, into daily efficiencies.
And I think a lot of things that people talk about when they say the Fourth Industrial Revolution is that, you know, it's becoming more blurry to tell the difference between the physical and the digital, right? So we have things like biohacking, where we almost are creating like these super beings, right?
So half man,
half robot, right? And you think about movies like, is it I Am Legend?
No, it's not I Am Legend. I Am Legend is the Will Smith one, isn't it? The one with the cars. It is I Am Legend, right?
I don't know.
When he had like that.
I don't know.
One eternity later.
Robot.
iRobot.
Yes.
Potentially. Where we have the movies that also Star Wars, etc., where we see the use of technology in these movies. And I guess, you know, what we need to do is to always bring it back home, because I think people, when they hear things such as automation, the first thing that, you know, comes to mind is people will be without jobs, right? But is that really true? Potentially yes and no, but there's always room for access and more job creation through technology. But we need to equip ourselves to be able to move into a different type of workforce.
Not ignoring maybe the realities that we are faced with. We do have, Africa has the largest rate or increase of youth in the world. And what are we doing with this labor that we have on our hands? You know, I mean, what are we supposed to do with those people who require labor-intensive work in a space that requires less labor-intensive work and maybe more critical thinking and more skills development?
And whenever we speak about Africa, we can't forget that we're not as developed as the first world, right? We always lag behind, I guess, when it comes to these revolutions. If we think about the first revolution, it took us about 60 years to catch up, right? And with the fourth industrial revolution, we're still lagging behind in certain parts of the continent. And there's work that needs to be done from a base infrastructure, to get it up to par so that people have access still to like electricity, people have access to health care, people have access to like clean water, the basics. We need to get those right. Then we also have the lens now where technology and disruption is happening in and around us.
Yes. So, I mean, whether the infrastructure and the technology and the running water and electricity is there, the revolution is happening regardless of whether we're keeping up or not, right?
Yeah.
So how do we ensure as a country, as a continent, that somehow we are implementing and seeing the ways in which already has started to improve and work on our lives?
Yeah.
I mean, so important factors, I mean, there's a various amount of ways and aspects and factors that technology has already started to improve our lives, right? But in aspects such as technology, access to finance,
basics,
to financial inclusion, education,
and the disruption of business models.
Yes.
Right. One of the big things that people talk about is artificial intelligence. Right. If you're watching this, there's an element of artificial intelligence in your device.
Yes.
When you use Google Maps, Waze, etc., that's artificial intelligence. But it now becomes the scale in which we operate, right? Where the technology starts to almost like separate society. I think that's like the gap that people need to understand, and that's a gap that needs to be filled. So if we want to contextualize the technologies, if we look at education, for example, right, as a starting point, where are we today in terms of education, and where could we be if we accurately and properly implement technology into this space?
So, I mean, I think the technology has allowed us to broaden and kind of look at different ways in which we can learn, acquire skills, and get educated, right? So aspects such as LinkedIn Learning, Get Smarter, and other online platforms that give you access to be able to learn things, and maybe get a qualification or certificate or diploma in a university in the United States, without having to get onto a plane and go to the United States and acquire that skill and implement it in your current life, right? Learning things such as coding on an online platform, those you acquire skills, you're in the comfort of your home, and you're able to broaden kind of like your perspective on things without even leaving your country.
Yeah, for sure. Another area where we can see improvement, with the accurate use of technology is the issue around financial inclusion.
Yes.
If we just look at South Africa itself, we have over like 13 million people that are currently unbanked, right? They have no access to the formal financial economy. They have no access to credit. And so, through that, there's a lot of missed opportunities, right? And we continue to see this big gap. And the basics of financial literacy also widen whenever we talk about, technology. So people talk about have like a financial app. Banks are talking about, you needing to download their apps, etc. But if you don't have the basic understanding and access to the financial products, then you're already marginalized, you're already out of the conversation, right? So what we see is technology now is creating, like telcos are creating things such as wallets, banks are creating wallets where you can actually transact digitally without actually having to have the complicated technological apps, to do your banking. So it's the basics. So the proliferation of USSD banking across Africa is allowing people to participate in the formal economy.
And also, just like there's an app called Tana, which is helping people get access to a credit record. So what they'll do is they use probably, I think, I'm not quite sure, but they also use kind of a USSD platform in which they'll borrow credit to individuals or small companies, and then in that way you're able to use the record or your payment record that you have on that app in order to use it to prove to the banking industry that you have a record and you've been paying it back. And so that has been helping to kind of give people access to different ways in which they can get credit through the formal banking industry.
Yeah. So microloans obviously play a big role, I think, in Africa and a lot of emerging economies, right? Because people, like you're saying, they don't always have the right credit record. And so how do you create ways in which you can educate them that, you know, if you take money out, this is what interest is and this is how much you need to pay back, right? Through the basics. And through that they grow. And that means that they can go and order like stock and start a small business as well. So that's one way in which we see technology assisting in terms of financial inclusion. Another area, and the biggest, is the disruption of business models.
Yes. So, I mean, we've been seeing that largely internationally, but there are very specific and brilliant South African examples. But most common and popular examples are Uber and Airbnb, which have disrupted the space in the way that, you know, businesses form. They've literally created a platform where they have given, you know, the provider, you know, and, you know, the person who needs the service together on a platform without even having to purchase cars. I mean, they have no cars. They didn't physically have to start a shuttle service in which they're renting them out to people. And, you know, it's just a platform-based business.
And I think, you know, when we look at like this disruption of business models, it's really simple in their nature, right? It's really speaking to the core need that exists within society and in the market. And how do you connect the people that require this need? So, you know, we see peer-to-peer lending as one of the things that's happening. So an insurance company, a startup, started by like a small group of guys, very young, Pineapple Insurance. You know, it's almost like a peer-to-peer insurance platform. They've disrupted the insurance industry as we know it today. Right? You can insure your own things at your own time, on your own device, etc. So I guess, you know, unpacking and understanding the role that technology plays in everyday society and the impact that the internet has, you know, on how we bank, how we do business, you know, is one aspect of it, right? And we mentioned earlier that, you know, there are general infrastructure issues that need to be put in place and, you know, that need to catch up generally for a lot of people living in different communities. But I guess this is where things such as policy and government come into play, because all of this can, you know, for its effectiveness can only be done through effective use of policy and policy making, as well as the role that government plays in how businesses perform and do everything. I mean, also, if we look at startups, right, the rate in which we see startups growing, they might be growing at a faster rate than regulation, but government also, you know, they need to keep up. They need to create enabling environments that allow people to participate holistically.
But also, I mean, I think it's part of government intervention in order for them to encourage kind of a culture of startups and entrepreneurship, and encouraging SMEs, because they are the ones that are creating these platforms. They create different markets and different environments of employment, right? And they can create the type of businesses and business models that can create employment in different ways for an array of people who didn't even see employment in that way. I mean, look at the Uber drivers, or Natasha, who leaves her home for a few months and can rent out her apartment to people. You know, that's creating different forms of either dual income or income in streams of ways that you never thought of before. And that is the importance of maybe government intervention, creating policies and implementing policies that allow maybe a competitive area, but also an inclusive space and environment for people to be able to implement these ideas in the country.
I mean, that's in a nutshell just what 4IR is and some of the ways that technology is impacting a lot of the industries. If you guys have your own examples that you're happy to share with us, please let us know. You can comment down below.
And I mean, I think that the big thing to understand is, one, every industry is being disrupted.
Yes.
So no one is safe, right? So it is important to upskill, to learn, to always just, expand yourself in the environment that you're in.
Yeah.
But to understand that the aim is not necessarily to make you obsolete, but it is to create more efficiencies in you. So the question is, how do I make myself more efficient?
Yeah.
How do I use the environment and the change that is happening around me to enable it to make me more efficient?
Yeah.
And that's what keeps you
Relevant.
in the environment. Relevant. Yes.
Relevance.
Yes, that is true.
That's the key.
Scary times, but also very interesting and exciting time to be in.
Yeah.
Right now.
Go out there, learn.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you for watching.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
Yes, and continue engaging with us in the conversation. I love the people who engage with us on our personal platforms like WhatsApp, but please do be encouraged to leave a comment on our WhatsApps, on our social media page, on
And
Instagram.
on YouTube.
Yes, and on YouTube, so that we can engage in the conversation and maybe even have follow-up type of questionnaires on social media to say, this person asked this, and it's open for discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.
Goodbye.